Welcome back to Think Tech. I'm Jay Fidell. It's the 4 o'clock block here in Honolulu. And we're talking to Leila Katšajeva, who is in Estonia right now. And we're going to talk about transitional justice, namely transitional justice in Sierra Leone, which is on the west side of Africa. Welcome, Leila. Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you, Jay. It's my pleasure to be here today, or tonight for me. The time difference is quite brutal.
Yeah, I'm sure. So can you tell us a little about yourself? You're a lawyer. Are you with Project Expedite Justice here in Honolulu? That is in the Big Island, actually, in Kona. And I'd just like to know a little about what brings you to Project Expedite Justice, what brings you to being a lawyer, and what your mission in life is.
Sure, Jay, that's entirely correct. I'm with Project Expedite Justice now, and well, I will start from a little bit ahead of this time and tell you a bit about myself. So I did my bachelor's degree in Estonia, where I'm actually from, and I moved to do my master's degree in the University of Amsterdam. And actually, I was brought to the Project Expedite Justice by one of your former guests, Nicholas, who spoke about transitional justice in Colombia, I believe. He was a guest lecturer at my university, and he gave a very fascinating speech about Project Expedite Justice. As soon as he started talking, I felt a real calling for what he was addressing, the issues, the way the Project Expedite Justice treats their work, the passionate attitude the project has. And so I applied, and I got enlisted as a legal intern / consultant to the Project Expedite Justice. That's how I ended up here.
Fabulous. You called them fabulous.
Exactly.
So that tells us a lot about you. What do you, is that your legal mission?
My legal mission, well, I would say I'm very lucky to have discovered my mission at 23 years old, and I really believe in justice, in transitional justice as well as in justice in general, and I believe that this is my calling. Yeah, that's
Right,
pretty
got
much.
it. So today we're going to talk about Sierra Leone. Sierra Leone has had some troubles over the past few decades. It spent 10 years in a civil war that was devastating. Then it somehow resurrected itself, and I suppose not without some issues. And those issues involve transitional justice and justice in general. And the dichotomy, as I understand it, for this discussion is sometimes you like to see transitional justice happen in the country, by the country, with the people who have been involved and seen it and who will render justice. Other times that doesn't work so well, and you need intervention by the international community. So which side does the Sierra Leone fall on?
Again, Jay, you're entirely correct. It is always fascinating to see the countries resurrect themselves, but unfortunately, many times it is just not possible due to the mass atrocities that the country has suffered, due to the lack of resource, or sometimes even due to unwillingness to adjudicate the violators in the country itself. And in those such situations, the international involvement is indeed crucial. And Sierra Leone actually falls into the category of countries that could not do themselves justice by themselves. They really needed the international intervention after being in conflict for 11 years. Well, you were correct. You dismissed it in 1 year. It was 11 years of civil war.
Okay.
And they really couldn't do it by themselves, even though they tried to. And the dichotomy here was just the fact that in Sierra Leone, why I chose this example is because there was a constant overthrowing of the government. So there was no civil society as such, and it was just impossible in those circumstances to reestablish the rule of law that was destroyed during the civil war in Sierra Leone.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. So, I mean, to their credit, I suppose, to the credit of the then leadership, they tried. They tried to do justice internally in Sierra Leone. What did that attempt mean? How do you try, and how do you know when it isn't working?
Well, again, in the context of Sierra Leone, I would say that when so the to go back in history, what happened there is that the whole issue was actually a resource curse. It's a phenomenon that explains situations of countries that do have natural resources but are unable to manage them on their own, and then end up in very poor economic situations. That's exactly what happened in Sierra Leone. So Sierra Leone has a great natural resource in diamonds, and they started mining those diamonds in 1930s already, actually. But then, because they didn't have the technologies and the knowledge to do so correctly, the diamond industry became a facilitator of corruption within the country, because they had to resort to external aid. And then that naturally facilitated an economic process of benefiting those who are dealing with the situation. And then that all of this led to Sierra Leone being one of the poorest countries by 1991 in the whole world. That in turn opened the door for the civil war, because the population was dissatisfied with the distribution of natural resource. The population was poor. A certain very polarized segment of people were rich. And so the overall situation in the country was dissatisfaction of the population. And that brought about different rebellious groups that wanted to overthrow the government. And that's how the civil war in Sierra Leone started. It was the Revolutionary Front Unit, a rebellious group that was funded by the corrupt trade in diamonds, and that ended up overthrowing the government. And that opened the doors for 11 years of civil war, of struggle between the government and the rebellious forces, and then just no centralized government whatsoever. So the issue in the country was that without the centralized government, they were unable to establish the rule of law. That is a very complicated dichotomy, but to put it shortly, 11 years of non-centralized government, of no exact government in power, so to say, led to the complete abandonment of the rule of law in the country.
And I'm sure that that comes with an economic collapse.
Exactly. That was all tied together, and well, there were no resources, no economic resources, and no civil resources to establish the rule of law in the country at that point.
Let's examine that for a minute. And I do want to get to the atrocities that you are concerned with. But I think it's an interesting concept that people in the West maybe don't understand. So here you have foreign interests coming in to mine the diamonds and other resources, and they create corruption. How does that happen? What's the process by which foreign interests undermine the what do you call it, the legal infrastructure, the social infrastructure of a given vulnerable country?
Well, I guess there is no unequivocal answer to this. What I personally think is that the foreign country coming to help out in that situation only cares about their own interest. And then the population that is in the host country, which doesn't have a great legal system, which doesn't have great civil rights protection, the people who are in charge of mining natural resources, diamonds, whatever it be, they're looking out for themselves, to put it simply. That's what happened in Sierra Leone as well, because during the government and Stevenson's from late 1960s to early 1980s, it is an established fact that the diamond mining was benefiting only the government itself and not the population. So that's just the lack of civil society and civil population rights protection in the country, and that the foreign company is just not the one to take charge here or to take care of the population, right?
Yeah, nobody takes care of them, so you have what I would call a failed state. There is no country. It's just everybody for himself, and it's just an expression of human greed. And you don't care about your neighbor, you don't care about your community, and then you have a failed state. Now, is the Civil War a result of this failed state, or does it contribute to the failure of the state, or both?
I would again, I believe that it's a very subjective point of view of mine. I believe it's both. I believe that if the state was not already close to failure, the civil war in that envisionment would have never happened. But also, the civil war really destabilized already unstable country and contributed to even more atrocities, to even more political instability. Yeah, it really works both ways. It's hard to differentiate what caused what. It's more centuries of uncertainty, political uncertainty, and also we have to consider that Sierra Leone was under the foreign powers for very long. It only liberated itself from the United Kingdom in 1960s. So the political instability, the country never became completely politically stable, I would say.
Was Sierra Leone part of the slave trade back in the 19th century, 18th century?
Uh, to be honest with you, I am not very well informed in this topic particularly. I would guess so, but I would not want to make a statement about that.
Okay. So the war that lasted 11 years, that's a long time. You know, the American Civil War lasted no more than 4 years. This was pretty serious. And furthermore, in the American Civil War, we did have government on both sides. And, you know, it was a strange time, of course, but we did have government. In the case of Sierra Leone, you start out with a failing government, and then you have this very long civil war. I mean, what happened to the average person? How much violence, death, and destruction was there in that 11-year period?
Well, that is a question that worries us all. I guess that's the central question for me, at least. And you're completely right. Again, there was a lot of destruction. There was a lot of mass atrocities, and it only got worse with the time passing by. Actually, um, that was kind of reconciliated and remedied a little bit when Sierra Leonean court, a special court for Sierra Leone, was established in 2002. However, the amount, well, you're completely right, the amount of atrocities, the amount of damage done to the country, I believe can never be remedied, actually, because during
How,
those 11 years, the amount of deaths, but not only just the destruction of the whole country, population, all the values, everything is immense.
I'm getting the feeling, Leila, that this was really terrible, even as compared to other countries that were in trouble socially and economically in Africa in that period. Am I right? This was really among the worst, or possibly the worst, violent conflagration that took place in that period. Am I right?
Well, it was quite bad, and it also shows from the fact that it attracted the attention of the United Nations, because we know there are a lot of problems, infrastructural as well as political, as well as social in the continent. But those that attract the attention of the United Nations, those are probably the biggest scale. They're not more important, they're not more violent or less violent. They're just so widespread and so large scale and so visible to the outer world that they're just making more fuss in that sense, and they're attracting international organizations, and well, for their own good, as it turns out.
Mm. So, it might have gone on forever, I suppose. But what brought it to an end? Was it intervention by the United Nations? Was it intervention by countries in Europe? Did the United States have any role in slowing it down and bringing it back to a peaceful state?
Well, so that's a very interesting question. Thank you, Jay. That's why I actually chose the example of Sierra Leone as well, because it's very interesting how the international community, how the United Nations approached the issue. So actually, already when the war was still going on, there was no official end of the war declared. The United Nations, or more so the Security Council, so U.S. clearly played a great role, established an observing mission in the Sierra Leone, which is very different from the usual peacekeeping missions or peace building missions. Observing mission is really something that is established in order to monitor the human rights violations, to record them, and maybe then bring them to some kind of justice in the future. But the mission itself is really observing. The name is very well spoken in that sense. So that's how it all started out. Then during that time when the observing mission was focusing on just monitoring the conflict, on trying to advise the country how to uh, on disarmament and how to restructure the national security, the United Nations understood that this is not working out because the civil war is only continuing, is only taking turns. So then in 2000, the Security Council decided to establish a real peacekeeping mission after the observing mission had kind of outsourced itself in that sense. And that peacekeeping mission was already something much more serious. It included armed soldiers, armed military personnel. They demobilized 75,000 ex-fighters, and among those, child soldiers, which is very important for the justice and for the for the furtherance of the community, because those children are clearly very, very traumatized from all the atrocities and from all the mental pressure as well. And then the peacekeeping mission went on for 3 years in Sierra Leone. Already after the war was declared as ended in 2002, the peacekeeping mission continuing on in Sierra Leone, it helped establishing the special court for Sierra Leone, which is the greatest manifestation, according to me, of transitional justice in Sierra Leone, because it was a hybrid court. It was a court composed of international and national professionals working in there, and it was adjudicating international crimes committed against the civilian population in Sierra Leone during the civil war. There was just something that was very novel. It was the first international tribunal to adjudicate crimes like child soldier inscription and forced marriage and crimes like this. There was really something, something that made the history in that sense.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that at the time, and it was shocking. Child soldiers, that's really an awful thing in the sense that it ruins the children and it ruins the next generation that way. What about doing violence to civilians? Would you include those in the atrocities?
Of course. Those were also the crimes that were adjudicated by the same special court for Sierra Leone as well. I just mentioned some crimes that were novel to the international community that this particular court adjudicated and focused a lot on, but also the atrocities, the murders, the lootings, the damage done to the civilian property. All of those things were taken into consideration in the court as well.
And this had been going on for the duration of the Civil War, I take it.
Yes.
Wow. So going back to the very beginning of our conversation, into this basic dichotomy of states which have the infrastructure to deal with accountability and states which require foreign international justice to deal with it. I take it Sierra Leone ultimately became a state where you had to have foreign intervention to deal with it, to create the accountability, to have the justice, to find those who were responsible. Am I right?
Well, I believe so. I believe that maybe it could have potentially do it by itself, but it would have taken much longer. The conflict probably would have continued because even the peace agreement between the Revolutionary Front and the government was brokered by the United Nations. The deal was made by the United Nations. And all the efforts to do so before between the governments or the overthrown governments failed. So taking that in account, I believe that in this particular situation, the international intervention was crucial to solve the situation and to actually preserve what's left of the country.
What's left is right. So all inherent in all of this is the notion that we've talked about before on this transitional justice discussion, and that is you can't end the trouble until you have accountability. In order to bring it to an end, to close it, to put closure on it, when you've had atrocities and the like, you need to have a body of justice, call it transitional justice, I guess, come in and identify those who were responsible and punish them. Am I right?
Well, punishment is a strong word, but you're right in that there's really no reconciliation for the country, for the victims of the atrocities, unless there is justice, unless there is accountability, unless the violators are identified and brought to the responsibility of their acts. And that's what happened in Sierra Leone. It was not only the court that gave the population this, but there was also a truth commission where the victims and the former perpetrators were brought together and were, well, discussing in a formal setting what happened and how to move on from that. And then the United Nations also trained the local police, the local law enforcement agencies. The mission was huge. The mission lasted for years, and they helped the country rebuild itself from the scratch. They they reestablished the trust of the population towards the government, towards the social services. It was really, yes, in that sense, it was really bringing the country back on its feet and reestablishing the justice by the
Yeah, yes.
international organization. Yeah.
When I mentioned the word punishment, you felt that that was too strong a word for it. But if somebody does atrocities, killing, maiming, raping, doing violence in every which way to the society and the people, without regard for whether they're military or non-military, just damaging everything in sight and killing everything in sight. Isn't punishment appropriate? Are you saying that in the course of transitional justice, we don't like to use that word because we don't like to punish people? We'd rather just reveal them and shame them? Is that what you're saying?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I guess that my point was coming from the fact that I'm a lawyer, and what I would like to see, or what is my main goal and my main mission, is to see the reconciliation and is to see the country back on its feet, the country with a stable legal system. And punishment does not always account for that, I would say. There is a lot we can do by rehabilitation, for example, for the child soldier situations. When it is a child, I do not believe that punishment is the most effective way to deal with the situation. I believe that every situation necessitates a certain outcome, a certain way to deal with it, and it's not always punishment. However,
Yeah.
I understand that those atrocities and crimes are very angering, and that the population, the people would probably like to see punishment. That is,
Hmm.
I acknowledge that. Yeah.
The other underlying notion that I take out of this is that when you've been through a period of 11 years of chaos and violence, you don't know what happened. You don't know who exactly was doing what. There's no record of it. There's no database where you can say, these are the people who were participating in the violence, and these were the ones who were the victims of the violence, and these were the child soldiers, and so forth. And so when you turn back and look back down the road, you really don't know what happened. And thus the truth commissions and the investigation of these matters is so critical to getting a handle on where you are. I mean, you don't know where you are until you know where you've been. Am I right about that?
That is very true, Jay. And that is why international investigations, international criminal investigations are usually extremely lengthy, is because it takes so much time to reconstruct the history, to investigate, to take endless victim witness testimonies in order to reconstruct the truth. And you are entirely right. And I believe that many things remain unresolved or unknown, and it is excruciating. It is excruciating, but it is how it is. And I believe what's most important, or the takeaway from this, is to do the maximum, to do the best possible to bring justice, even though, even though the notion that we will never maybe be able to know the whole truth, we still have to do our best to investigate, to collect testimonies. That's what the United Nations did there with the observing mission, right? They monitored, they restored evidence, they did that job. It's not perfect, but it is already something, and that's what's most important, at least for me. Any progress is better than nothing.
Sure, but we're 20 years out now. This civil war, at least by the history books, ended almost 20 years ago. How is, and I guess the investigation is not quite done, ongoing, still to be unearthed. How is Sierra Leone today? Can I walk down the street? Can I live my life without corruption?
Um, I wouldn't take those stands about corruption. I'm not, again, very well informed about that, but what I can say for sure is that the special court has terminated its active functioning for now. It has brought 10 people to the court. 9 have been convicted. 1 fled and is still in exile in that sense. The Truth and the Reconciliation Commission has also been shut down, and the United Nations peace building mission was shut down in 2014, and the monitoring mandate was given to the national team in the country. So I take from that that the situation with the civil war is resolved, that it is much safer, much more peaceful, and much politically stable place to be in right now, rather than what it was 20 years ago. That is
So
that is
I,
my comment.
I have a big question for you, Leila. All these things that we've been talking about, is chaos, is violence, is violation of human rights and abandonment of the rule of law possible again in Sierra Leone?
Well, I tend to never be too optimistic. We can never exclude those things from happening. We can never say it would never happen again. However, looking at the progress made in those years, looking how the democracy has been rebuilt, how the rule of law has been established with the help of the United Nations, I have a feeling that it is less likely than it would have been 20 years ago.
Oh,
And that
sure.
is a good thing.
What about the leadership? What are they like? And what are the government institutions like these days? Are they responsible leaders?
Well, for what I know, for what the information is out there, more so than before. Again, those things are very relative. From our Western perspective, maybe not so much, but for them, it's a great progress. So I
Mhm.
guess we just have to be patient at this point.
We would be remiss if we did not discuss Project Expedite Justice. This is not just theoretical. Project Expedite Justice has a role in all of it. Can you talk about the role of Project Expedite Justice in Sierra Leone and other countries in Africa?
Well, in Sierra Leone, in that context, there is no direct engagement, but I can really see how it could have been, how Project Expeditious Justice could have assisted Sierra Leone. Because, for instance, what we're doing right now, and I'm particularly also part of a project in South Sudan, and what we're doing is that we're trying to build the local capacity to already during the time being investigate and store the information about the ongoing atrocities. And that's what you just spoke about as well, right? It is very crucially important to store information in order to be able to look back at the history and identify what happened. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's what would have been very, very helpful in Sierra Leone, as you mentioned, Jay, right? So right now, what we are doing as Project Expert Justice in South Sudan is that we're helping the local investigators to identify international crimes, to ameliorate their skills in testimony taking, to to train them in international criminal law so that they know what they are faced with, so that what is maybe a norm to them is not a norm anymore, because we're trying to shed light on the international law and international regulations and international stands on those matters. so that they can actually locally do something about it before it is a situation comparable to what is happening in what was happening in Sierra Leone, right? So that they can deal with the problems live, real time, and we're trying to contribute to that as much as possible.
Yeah, you've used the word excruciating on to define the process of investigation, but it escapes me a little, and I would like to ask you how you do that. Do you take a flight and go to Sudan or Sierra Leone and get out on the street and talk to people? Do you find witnesses and take statements from them? And if you do that, and given the likelihood there are people who would be negatively impacted by the introduction of justice in that country, is it dangerous for you to do that? And who does it?
Well, so us particularly me, we do not do that. First of all, it's impossible right now during the current world situation, but also our purpose is not really doing it for them, but teaching or trying to assist them in doing that locally. That's where Project Expedited Justice stands. We are trying to build the local capacity to deal with the issues on the local level. So the training, well, what we do is really assisting, training, providing information, reviewing the reports that they are doing. That's my particular job in the project. I receive reports from the South Sudanese investigators. I review them, I give advice, and I try to help them to do better next time. That's pretty much my job. But what you said about the dangers of bringing justice, of course, especially in situations where there are power struggles and their dependencies and their all those different political interests, it's sometimes very dangerous to give testimonies. Maybe not so much for us, but for the people there, for the witnesses, for the victims, for those people, it is dangerous. And for that, a lot of organizations, NGOs implement victim protection, witness protection. Well, there are a lot of remedies to deal with those things.
Oh, gee whiz, I'm sure. That makes it so interesting and maybe a little frightening. Now, there's another factor here too, and I guess I would go to what I understand about South Sudan, is that the atrocities involve the complicity of, for example, international banks who made it all possible for these atrocities to happen back in the day, not too long ago. And so Project Expedite Justice has helped build a dossier of information, of evidence that could be used in an appropriate jurisdiction in order to pursue those banks. And right now, there's a lawsuit going in Paris against BNP, Banco Nacional de Paris. And my question is, does that happen all the time, or is that a unique event? Is it going to happen in Sierra Leone?
Do you mean the financing or
The
what?
financing and then ultimately a lawsuit by victims of the atrocities against those found responsible for the atrocities, including international banks that might have made it possible by funding the government at the time.
Well, I would like to believe that financing of any kind of international crimes is not something current. I would like to believe that. The case is quite unique, to be fairly honest, because to establish corporate liability in cases like this is really hard. It is an issue in international law, and it's something I'm very proud of about Project Expedite Justice, that we've come such a long way with this. It is really something to be proud about, and I hope that those well lawsuits are gonna evolve, that this notion of corporate liability is going to evolve, and that we will be able to actually hold big corporations liable for those things. Because for now, well, so far it has been really hard to establish the responsibility of those institutions.
Hmm. Well, that takes us to one final point I would like to discuss with you, and that is, in dealing and looking back down the road and finding those responsible and holding them accountable for atrocities and violations of human rights. You don't have to get them all. Don't have to get them all. You have to get some high profile ones though, because when you do get them, when you do reveal what happened in a truth commission or otherwise, or in an international court determination of some kind, the world will know. And that includes the people in Sierra Leone, the people in South Sudan, the people who might, be involved in similar violations in the future. And so you're holding a torch, a beacon up of human rights, and other people will see that, and hopefully they will not violate human rights going forward. Am I right about that?
You are completely right, Jay. That is one of the biggest purposes of international criminal law, because again, you're entirely correct. It is impossible, even if we wanted to get them all in that sense. But it is important to set the example, to show the international community that those atrocities will not go unnoticed, that they will not go unresorted to, and that there is justice. There is international justice, there is transnational justice, and that is the important thing.
Leila, it's so nice to talk to you. Leila Katšajeva of Project Expedite Justice, talking to us from Estonia today. Thank you so much, Leila.
Thank you so much, Jay. Very nice to be here. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Same here. Aloha.